Okay, welcome back everybody. I hope you got a cup of coffee. So next up, keeping with the topic of e-portfolios and the whole area of universal design for learning, delighted to have Dr. Cormac Flynn here with us, and Cormac's going to give another flavour of e-portfolios, looking at a different digital platform. So we're looking forward to that. And Cormac has been really involved with UDL here in the Institute and a facilitator of the UDL badge. So thanks very much for that as well, Cormac, this year.
No problem at all.
So handing over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Karina. So I'm Cormac Flynn. I'm in the Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering in the School of Engineering. I'm just going to talk a little bit about ePortfolios and also UDL and how UDL is embedded in ePortfolios. So universal design for learning, it makes teaching and learning accessible for all. And the framework is displayed here. So it's based on this kind of three broad areas. On the left in the green is providing multiple means of engagement. So trying to make the student enthusiastic for what they're learning. So how are we doing that within a module or within an assessment? The purple in the middle is multiple means of representation. So this is the what of learning. So this is trying to figure out how students are perceiving and learning the content of the course or of the module. And then on the very right, we've got multiple means of action and expression. So this is what they call the how of learning. So how students are expressing themselves and expressing and demonstrating their learning. So UDL is based, scientifically based on neurological research and kind of looking at how students learn. ePortfolios, so we've heard a few talks so far about ePortfolios. They've been used for quite a long time and getting more popular in recent years. And these are kind of an electronic demonstration of students' learning, and they're also, what's important is the reflection on their learning. So we saw in the last talk with Helen and Joan, many of the benefits of ePortfolios, and they demonstrated quite clearly kind of how it improves future employability. And there are lots of other advantages to ePortfolios as well. So there's opportunities to make connections, connections with other modules, or connections between the module content and stuff happening in the real world. And it's been shown that it can develop their leadership skills in terms of crafting their ePortfolio, and leads to higher levels of student success as well. So what's not to like about ePortfolios? So what I want to look at is what components of the UDL framework are within an ePortfolio assessment. So the UDL framework, which I showed in the first slide, is going to do a tour of that and look at what aspects of that framework are embedded in ePortfolios. So just give a bit of context, the module where I use the ePortfolio assessment is the human physiology module. It's a first-year module on the biomedical engineering program. Typically, there's about 40 students, certainly about 40 students at the end of the year. There's kind of a common entry component in a program, so students kind of choose what they want to do at Christmas time. So it starts off around 80, so by the end of the year, it's about 40 students. And it's pretty tight. We only meet 1 hour per week. That has some implications in terms of how I run the ePortfolio assessment. So I've been using an ePortfolio assessment for a number of years now, and it's changed quite a bit. And the big changes were actually complete thanks to the pandemic, because it allowed me to kind of get rid of the traditional 60% closed book written exam and replace it with a larger ePortfolio assessment. So thankful for the pandemic for that, not for other things. So the ePortfolio assessment itself, I say 8 scaffolded tasks here. This year I actually ran it with 7, so about 7 or 8 scaffolded tasks throughout the year. And the tasks start off fairly simple. The first task I get them to do is kind of a bit of goal setting. What are their goals for the module? What are their goals for their program? Or their life in GMIT, or ATU as it is now. And then it gets into a little bit more detail on researching topics, various biomedical research topics. And the purpose here is to try and make connections between human physiology and biomedical engineering. So we're training biomedical engineers here, so we want to see what the relevance of human physiology is for, in the engineering world. And then there's plenty of opportunities for peer review, which is really important, ePortfolios, and also self-reviewing and self-reflection. So to do the task, I usually set a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks to do the task. And then once that's completed, then I examine them, provide feedback. And the feedback is both written feedback and audio feedback. So I'm going to start a tour of this framework, the UDL framework. So I'm starting on the very left-hand side of the framework on multiple means of engagement. So within that, the UDL framework is suggesting to provide options for recruiting interest. So various options to get the student motivated in the module and in the assessment. So within that, there's a suggestion about optimizing individual choice and autonomy. So giving the students choice in what they do. So within the tasks, there's generally always a choice for what the student can do. So for example, on the left-hand side, one task would have been, while we're doing the nervous system, was to go out and research a particular topic. And the choice of topics might have been epilepsy, seasonal affective disorder, or tickling. So they can look at that, examine those topics, and they make the connections between those research topics and what they're covering in the class. So they're making some clear connections there. Another task was reviewing a podcast. So it was a great podcast on NPR, and happened one week they were looking at the brain. So in the nervous system, this was perfect. So within that hour-long podcast, there were options to look at some sub-stories within that. So they had a choice of 3 that they could look at. And they, listen to the podcast, reflect on it, and then share, also reflect on it within their group, with their classmates. Okay, moving down our table, so providing options for sustaining effort and persistence. So within this, they're suggesting, the UDL framework suggests that it's important to foster collaboration and community to engage the student. So for that, within the class, I formed peer groups. There's typically about 5 or 6 students in a peer group, and gave them the platform to share their portfolio work and their task. So they upload onto a space where they share their portfolio task, and they can ask questions of each other. They reviewed each other's portfolio, gave suggestions for improvement, highlighted what they liked about it. And this provided a clear opportunity for community to be developed and for students to improve their own portfolios just by talking with each other. They also talked with me, and so it's very important in the UDL framework is to give opportunities to provide feedback so the students can master their particular area of in the module or what they're learning. So ePortfolios give continuous feedback is embedded within the portfolio. So after each task, I provided feedback to them, and they're also providing feedback to me through the reflections. So through the reflections, I can identify what the challenges that they're having, and then I can provide advice on that they can use to improve their subsequent tasks for their ePortfolios. And I had a task where they had to demonstrate how they implemented some suggestions from me in subsequent tasks. You could see over the year, continuous improvement with the students and how they presented their work. Staying within the multiple means of engagement, we've got self-regulation, so providing options for that. And then underneath that, we have a suggestion from the framework about developing self-assessment and reflection. Reflection is the cornerstone of ePortfolio. So they're creating these artifacts, but what's really important is their reflection on them. So every task students were reflecting on. If they were uploading a video, they were telling me why they were choosing that video, why was it important to them, how did it help with them. And then for the reflection, in general, they're talking about what they liked about a topic, where were their challenges, how did they try and overcome those challenges, and also identifying opportunities for growth, like what more would they like to learn about beyond what the ePortfolio task was, or what the module task was, or the module content was. This is one example from this year. There was one student who was super creative, and I'll show some other examples from this student as well. But very thorough reflections, very thoughtful reflections on that. That said, some of the feedback from students is that they find reflections hard, and it is challenging. I find reflections hard. It takes time to build up and be able to become fluent and be able to really reflect on your learning. But it's important. It kind of makes, the phrase I like is makes the invisible learning visible. So your students are figuring out how they're learning, and also I'm figuring out how the students are learning as well, and what's effective for them. So they do find it challenging. So to address that, I think it's important, and what I implemented this year was provide plenty of prompts for reflection. So give them questions to answer, which would lead towards the reflection and develop their skills there. And I think this year was a significant improvement in the quality of the reflection from students. All right, we're going to jump over to the other side of the framework, and we're looking at action and expression, so how are students demonstrating their learning. And underneath that, we've got providing options for expression and communication. So within that is the opportunity to use multiple media for communication and multiple tools for construction and composition. So students could use whatever they wanted for a particular task. The ePortfolio platform I used was OneNote, the class notebook, so not a dedicated ePortfolio platform. I do have reasons for choosing that. But within that, students could use whatever they want. So there's a whole range of media that students use. Some students just did hand-drawn, beautiful, creative, artistic summary of blood flow and pressure here, and just scanned that and uploaded it. Other students used Prezi, so had great audio reflections embedded in their Prezi. Other students used mind maps. Big fan of mind maps myself. I use them a lot in class, so I encourage students to use them for their portfolios as well. So they create an intricate mind map, researching a topic and also reflecting on that. Other students use Microsoft Publisher, and then on top of that, you've got students who just use the standard kind of Word document and embed that in OneNote or a PowerPoint presentation. So they had complete freedom on how they wanted to communicate their learning. Back to that student who, this year, all they did was create everything within OneNote, and it was fantastic. I got completely lost in looking at their tasks each time. There was these fantastic little sketches which supported the text that they were doing, and it was great. I spent far too much time just reading through them, but it was wonderful to see the creativity in some of the portfolio generated by the students. Okay, executive functions, providing options for this. So this is providing ways for students to plan and set goals and monitor their progress. So within that, one important thing was going back to the reflections, was providing those prompt questions. So it allowed students to plan the reflection and get through the reflection. Another important thing was how is the ePortfolio assessment going to be assessed? And this is not specific to ePortfolios, it's any assessment in general, but for every task there was a detailed rubric which highlighted for students how to achieve proficiency in particular areas of the task at hand. So this one, the rubric on the screen, is just the rubric that was used for the podcast reflection. All right, so now we're going into the final area of the UDL framework. Down the middle, the purple, providing multiple means of representation. So providing options for perception. So within that, you're encouraged to offer or offer alternatives for auditory information and also visual information. So within that, in the ePortfolio itself, in terms of the feedback I provided, there was both written feedback and audio feedback. So it's very easy within OneNote just to embed audio feedback. It took a couple of minutes audio file, just me going through their portfolio, identifying where they could improve, what I liked about it, and things like that. And they engaged with that. Almost most of the students would listen to that audio feedback every time. So it was quite useful for them. I did drop the ball a little bit this year on one of the tasks. So the podcast task I mentioned earlier on about on different aspects of the brain. So it was a podcast, and it was the most popular task this year on the ePortfolio. Students really loved it, and in the reflections, it really came through how much they engaged with it. But one student in the reflection said, "I'm hard of hearing." And they don't necessarily have a problem one-to-one, but in the podcast, there was 3 or 4 voices talking, and they really struggled to distinguish between the voices. And I was like, oh, just schoolboy UDL error probably. And I went back onto the site to see was there a transcript available for the podcast, and there wasn't. So it's something I need to be, for me, I need to be more mindful of in the future to make sure that it is accessible for all students. Right, the last area, I think, so providing options for comprehension. So within that, suggesting to highlight patterns, critical features, big ideas, and relationships. So ePortfolios, for me, they're all about making connections between the module, content and stuff outside, between different aspects, from modules in the program. So making connections and establishing that relevance. Why are they doing human physiology? What's the point of it for them? Is it just about learning multiple things about the heart? It's not. It's about why is it important for a biomedical engineer to know about the heart and come up with solutions for when the heart goes wrong. And also, I'm sending them out doing all these tasks and researching tasks, and they're first-year students. And some of the feedback in earlier days was about they struggled with all the information. They go onto the web and go, what am I going to use here? There's so much information. So with that, it's important to provide tools so that students can process the information. And with that in mind, we took time out in the class to kind of talk about what makes good, how do you evaluate information on the web, what's a good website. And I provided them with a simple tool called the CRAP test. And it's just a one-page document. It has a series of questions under these different categories. And after answering the questions, the students themselves can evaluate the quality of their information. And within each ePortfolio task, I made sure that they did a CRAP test or something equivalent on the information that they're providing. And generally, the source of their information was pretty good. So I'm rattling on about how I think UDL is embedded in portfolios. What do the students think? So generally, it was overwhelmingly positive. Nobody had a bad thing to say about it. There's some technical issues around using OneNote in terms of upload speeds or syncing speeds and that. But what came through in the comments was how much they liked being able to choose what to research, and also it allowed them to be creative and present information in a way that was personal to them. So I think those two aspects, the multiple means of action expression and then multiple means of engagement, was clear from the student feedback. So that's me. It was the whistle-stop tour. So I kind of talked about one or two examples from each of the circled areas there. There's probably more that could be implemented into the ePortfolio. So it's definitely a work in progress. But thanks for your time. And I'm happy to take any questions.